Tired? Ooh. Let's do an energy check. All right. Raise your hand if your energy levels are greater than 10%. You have more than 10% energy. This is not good, guys. All right. What we're going to do is where everyone stand up and everyone turn to your left, about face left. And you're going to reach out and grab the shoulders of the person in front of you and give them a massage. And if there's... All right. You're not torturing them. You're giving them comfort. Comfort and kindness. And just know if you're hurting them, they will be turning around. Okay. All right. All right, stop. Now turn the other way and give your partner a massage or revenge. I don't know what's going on there, but okay. All right, that's enough. Grab your seat. Hopefully that was comforting, or at least enough pain to keep you awake. So we didn't have any more questions in the question box, and so we'll jump straight into it. Unless someone is just dying to ask something, you're free to raise your hand and ask. I'll give we've got a panicking person, so we'll give them space to think and process. Okay. Yes.
Where did you graduate?
Where did I graduate? So Lewis and I both went to UC Davis. So I got my bachelor's degree in English. Was not the best student. And I got my master's degree from Biola with a master's. It's a very long title. Master's of Arts in Christian Leadership with an emphasis in pastoral care and counseling is the full title. Yeah.
So what made you you talked about very personal deep stories, right? But what kind of brings you the courage topic about?
Yeah, so the question was what gives me the courage to share vulnerably, I guess, right? Yeah. I think one of the greatest gifts that God has given us is our story. And your story is extremely powerful, but it's not powerful if it's silent. Actually, a big turning point for me on this topic specifically happened the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. And I was part of the American Red Cross as my extracurricular kind of club thing. And every summer they would do this thing called the Leadership Development Center, which was kind of a week-long camp to do leadership development. And we did this one activity called Remembering the Blues, which was just kind of essentially small groups, and people would just share their stories. And it was the first time that I really shared my story with anybody. And it was definitely my first time sharing my story in a context outside of church. And in that experience, I realized that when you share your story with somebody, that is such a quick way to form deep and lasting connections. And so it is scary. It is scary, that initial kind of fear. But once you kind of get used to it, it's actually not that bad. It's not as scary as you might think. And also, the more you share, the more confident you become actually of your story. And so you begin to fear a little bit less the judgment of other people. And, I've shared my story and people have come away with unfair judgments and things like that. And for me, I'm okay with that because, they have to process just like I had to process. And so, but I encourage you guys all, when you get that opportunity, to really share your story with somebody because it's powerful and it's meaningful. So, cool. Good question. Thank you. All right, so we're going to get started today. Before we read our passage, there's going to be a little bit of context here, a little bit of history. And so if we rewind the clock back to the time of Moses, right? Some of you guys remember the guy Moses, the guy with the burning bush, the guy with the 10 plagues, right? And so he's taking the people of Israel who are captive in Egypt out, and then they begin to wander the wilderness because they're disobedient to God, essentially. But the one promise that is being kept throughout the whole thing is actually a promise that happens even before Moses' time with a guy named Abraham. And so God promises Abraham, from you I will create my people, and you will have your place and you will have your home. And we kind of talked about that idea of that home identity for the people of Israel being important last night. And so Moses takes the people of Israel out. They're wandering the wilderness. They're looking for the promised land. 40 years into it, they find the promised land. Moses, in a fit of anger, disqualifies himself from entering into the promised land, but then his second in command takes over, this guy named Joshua. And so Joshua leads the people of Israel into the promised land and essentially has to go to battle with a bunch of people there to essentially conquer the land. He is successful in doing so, and the people of Israel finally have their home, this place that they can finally call home. However, the people of Israel, for much of their lives, have just been wandering or have been captive, and so they have no idea what it means to be a nation. And when you happen to be a nation with neighboring people, you often have to go to war to defend your country. And they didn't know how to do that. They were essentially just ragtag bunch of people roaming around, but this became a problem. And so they needed some form of system of governance. They were like, we need to have some structural way to not only be a people, but to be a nation. And so as they were trying to process through this, their original system was God was their leader, and God would send these people, the judges, to essentially dispense of what God wanted to do. And over time, there was kind of mixed success there. By the way, the book of Judges is wild. So if you're bored and just want to read strange things, you can read the book of Judges. But anyway, and so there's a system of judges, but the people of Israel are a little bit unsettled because they're looking at the other countries around them, and they're like, man, the other countries have kings. All we have are judges. Now, I want to pause here because I think a lot of this is missed on our current cultural context. Like, we don't understand, like, what's the big deal between having judges and a king, right? So the judge was not actually the figure of authority. The judge was almost kind of like a police officer. He was sent by God, right? The king was the guy. And so the people of Israel are like, other countries have people we could physically see, physically interact with. There is a physical king that is there. In fact, as kings would conquer, they would erect statues of themselves wherever they were. And so even if you lived far away from where the king was, somewhere around you there would be some physical representation of the king. And so the people of Israel are like, all these other nations can be proud of their king, but we can't build a statue to God. Right? We don't want to create, we don't know we don't even know what God looks like. Right? And so they're like, every other country just has it better. So they're like, we want a king. And so they go to one of the judges and they're like, we don't want judges anymore. We want a king. And so the judge, Samuel, goes to God and is like, hey, the people want a king. And God tells them, you do not want a king. So Samuel goes back to the people, hey, God says we do not want a king. People go, no, we really do want a king. So Samuel goes back to God, hey, they say they really want a king. And God's like, they really don't want a king. But if that is what they say they want, I will let that happen. So they do this massive search through the nation of who could be a good representation of the people of Israel. And they land on this guy named Saul. Oh, I thought I had another picture. They land on this guy named Saul. Now, the best way I can describe Saul is, who here has seen Beauty and the Beast? Who here has seen like the animated Beauty and the Beast, not the live action one? Okay. I don't really like the live action one, so sorry. Anyways, but the best way I can describe the person that they picked, King Saul, was Gaston. Okay? So they go around the nation and they find the strongest, tallest, most handsome. The guy can eat 5 dozen eggs, right? Like, this is the guy, right? All the guys want to be him. All the girls want to be with him, right? He is the pinnacle of human excellence. And so the people are proud. They're like, we have our guy. That is King Saul. That is the guy we want to build statues of. That is the guy we want to follow. And so they're excited. And King Saul, by the way, in the beginning, very successful, because their main enemy at that time were the Philistines. And he's had some good track record against the Philistines. He's even saved people captured by the Philistines. But the Philistines are a formidable bunch, and they find themselves in battle once again. And this time, things are not going so well for King Saul. And he finds himself in a valley. And I'm not going to elaborate more on valleys, but not a good place to be. King Saul and his military are stuck in a valley, and the Philistines have the higher ground on both sides of the valley. So there's no way to escape. So King Saul, stuck in the valley. Now the Philistines, as they are encamped on both sides of the valley, begin to make a deal with the people at the bottom, with the trapped Israelites. And they begin to say, any of you with weapons, or any of you with knowledge of how to make weapons, feel free to come up and we will not kill you. And so they do. And we find out, actually, what ends up happening is the entire military of King Saul is reduced down to 2 swords. For all the people, there are 2 swords. And all the people start hiding in bushes, hiding in caves, hiding in cisterns, which are kind of like wells. And they're scared. And the Philistines have an easy plan. We're just going to starve them out. We don't need to go down and kill them. We'll just stay at the top of the high ground, and we'll just let them die. And things are looking quite hopeless. And so this is where we find ourselves in today's text, and we will be in 1 Samuel chapter 14. So, by the way, Jonathan is Saul's son. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father. So Jonathan is hiding with King Saul, and he's like, one day he turns to his armor-bearer, which is kind of like his bodyguard, his friend, his confidant, and he says, "Hey, let's go to the Philistine, let's expose ourselves to the Philistine outpost because I think I have an idea. I don't think my dad's going to like it, so we're not going to tell him." Okay? And so he said to the young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of these uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf, because nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." So this is his plan. He says, hey, let's go over to the Philistine outpost, and perhaps God will save us. That was his master plan. Maybe, right? Now, if you were the armor bearer, and by the way, remember there are 2 swords in the whole army. So who do you think has the 2 swords? Saul and the son. So there's probably 1 sword between him and the armor bearer, right? So you're the armor bearer holding one of 2 swords of the whole encampment, and now the prince is essentially telling you, hey, we're going to go expose ourselves to the enemies, and maybe God's going to do something. I don't know what your response would be, but my response would be like, no. Like, maybe we should check with your dad. You know, the guy who is Gaston, the smartest, strongest, wisest, most handsomest looking guy of all the nation. Maybe we should be listening to that guy, not you. That would be my response as the armor bearer, but that's not his response. This is what the armor bearer says. Do all that you have in mind. By the way, that part of it I have no issues with. If I were the armor bearer, I'd be like, yeah, do all that you have in mind. I'm happy for you. You go do it. But he continues, go ahead. I am with you, heart and soul. something about this armor bearer just has this deep loyalty to Jonathan, and he's like, you know what? I will go with you. I will fight with you. Even though there's only one sword, maybe we'll 50-50 take turns, Rochambeau for it, and see who gets, and so he goes and he says, I am with you, heart and soul. So what do? So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. Look, said the Philistines, the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in. The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor bearer, come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson. So Jonathan said to his armor bearer, climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Now, Jonathan, his elaborate plan was, hey, we're going to show up, expose ourselves to the Philistines, and we'll just do what they tell us to do. If they tell us to come up, we'll come up. If they tell us to stay here, we'll stay here. And maybe God's going to do something. And armor bearer goes, you know what? Go ahead. I am with you, heart and soul. So they do that. And the Philistines say, come up. And Jonathan, for whatever reason, has this confidence of saying, I believe the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. So Jonathan climbed up using his hands and his feet with his armor bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer followed and killed behind him. In that first attack, Jonathan and his armor bearer killed some 20 men in about an area of about half an acre. The plan works, right? Now, there's a lot missing in this text in terms of the details and the mechanics of how everything works. So we have to kind of read it imaginatively. But somehow, Jonathan and armor bearer expose themselves to the Philistines. Philistines tell them to come up. Jonathan and armor bearer start to climb up hands and feet up this mountain, probably one sword between them, while the Philistines at the top are probably just mocking them. Like, look at these two idiots climbing up this mountain. And then the text just says they got to the top of the mountain and killed 20 of them. And you're like, huh? Okay, what? How did that happen? We don't know exactly the mechanics, but that's what happened. Okay. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their swords. So I guess this is a little bit of the mechanics, but this happens a little after. But the Philistines are now confused, and they're now killing each other. Those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines and had gone up with them to their camp went over to the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. And so the other people who are hiding, they see what's going on, and they're like, hey, we can join them. When all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined in the battle in hot pursuit. And so everyone who was hiding again came out and joined them. And so as we look at this text this morning, there's some things I want us to consider. We have this distinction of smart things in life and wise things in life. There's a difference between being intelligent and being wise. And sometimes those things aren't the same thing. Intelligence, being smart, think of the most uber awesome human person and the nth degree human capacity. That is intelligence. Right? The best that man can offer. Intelligence. Saul was intelligent. He was the most intelligent. But he was not wise. So what is wisdom? Wisdom is thinking through things the way God thinks through them, not through human capacity. Now, I am not here this morning to tell you it is good to not be intelligent. Right? Don't walk away from like, oh, I went to retreat and it's like, man, we got to be dumb. Like, right? That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying there's a time to be intelligent and there's a time to be wise. Right? And so Jonathan found himself in a difficult situation where they tried to use all of human intelligence to solve their problems, but they were getting nowhere. In fact, they were trapped. They were hopeless. And so Jonathan turns to his armor bearer and says, hey, maybe God is going to work for us. Maybe it's not about human intelligence anymore, and maybe it's about God and his wisdom. Earlier, the people of Israel, they were frustrated that they didn't have kings. What they wanted for was human capacity. And the system that God had given them was a system of judges of saying, what you need is wisdom from me. And so what you see here is Jonathan reversing that. It's like, yes, my dad may be the king. My dad may be the pinnacle of human capacity. He may be intelligent. But maybe what we actually need is the wisdom of God. And so he turns to his armor bearer, and I love this guy. I wish he was named in Scripture. I hope to meet him in heaven, right? But this young armor bearer, rather than thinking of himself, rather than trying to be smart, he joins Jonathan in being wise. And he says, do all that is in your heart, for I am with you, heart and soul. Now, there are going to be times in your life where God calls you into a place of wisdom, which is going to be hard because sometimes it's going to look different than intelligence. And other times, God is going to call you to be an armor bearer because your friend is going to want to make a wise decision that is going to be hard, and they need the support and encouragement of you. And so as we return home, as we move on in our lives, I encourage you to really own up to your calling. Are you Jonathan in the moment? Is there something in your life where God is saying, look, I know that this may not seem like the smartest idea, but it is wise, and I want to challenge you to take that step. And that's going to be hard. And find your armor bearers. And there's going to be times when God calls you to be an armor bearer. Hey, I want you to support your friend. People are going to doubt them. But I am God. And I can do things differently. And so what ends up happening, in fact, is as Jonathan and the armor bearer accomplish this, they go up to the Philistines, kill them all. Notice what happens at the end. When all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined the battle in hot pursuit. Now, if you kind of just do research on the state of Christianity in our world today, there's a lot of statistics that you read that are going to seem very depressing and very sad, right? In youth ministry, the statistic that gets thrown around most often is 70% of kids who grow up in youth groups will eventually leave the church in college. 70%. We look at a decline in church attendance. We look at a decline in people's personal devotions. Nowadays, among churches, when we have like strategy meetings, and we have to think about people who we consider to be regular attenders, that number has shifted from, in the past, a regular attender was somebody who came to church once a week. Nowadays, a regular church attender is someone who comes once every 3 weeks. Yeah. And so you look at these stats and you start going, ooh, things aren't looking good. And I just want to say, we can look at those things and get discouraged, and we can start to hide. We can start going into our cisterns. We can start going into our caves, and we can start going like, I'm just going to wait it out. Whatever this terrible situation is, I'm just going to sit here and wait it out. And that might be the smart thing to do. But I want to challenge us to do something that is perhaps wise but not smart. That there is still a deep value and a deep joy of being a church community, but other people can't see that until we get Jonathans and armor bearers willing to make wise decisions, willing to go against the grain of culture, willing to do the things that God calls us to do just because he calls us to do it. And when you follow Jesus and when you follow God and these miracles start to happen, that's when other people who were hiding are going to see the testimony of your life, and they're going to start to follow and join you in that pursuit. I want to share 2 stories, and the first story, I want to give a warning. I'm going to share a story of a time that I was very wise, but not smart. So this is not advice to tell you to do the things that I did. But I'm also going to tell you I have no regrets of the decision that I made. And I would do it again. So take that as you may. When I was 26, I was part of a men's small group. And there was about 7 of us. And there was one person in our small group named Chris. Chris grew up in kind of a hard situation. He was a foster child, and his foster parents were good foster parents, but very strict foster parents. And so as he got older, there became a lot of friction between him and his foster family. Eventually, he found himself getting drunk one night, stealing a car, crashing the car into a neighbor's house, and getting arrested. At this time, we didn't know, as a small group, we didn't know what was going on. So basically, we just thought Chris disappeared because he never told, right? And a couple of months later, Chris shows up at small group again, and we're like, Chris, where have you been? And he's like, jail. And we're like, huh? What do you mean? And he explains what happened, and we're like, oh man, that's like, you should have, like, we were like, oh, you should have reached out, but then we were being insensitive. He's like, I didn't have money to call out of prison, so we were like, oh, yeah, sorry, okay. So Chris gets out of jail, and he starts to try to rebuild his life, right? At this point, his foster family has kicked him out, and he was trying to make ends meet, and so thankfully, we were able to get him into a support program for those who were exiting incarceration, and they were able to set him up with a little apartment. And then, over the course of the next couple of months, Chris disappears again. And at this point, we're like, no, not again. We have to find out where he is. And so we visit his apartment, and we hear people inside. And so we're like, oh, okay, Chris must be there. So we're like, hey, Chris, and we're knocking on the door, and Chris doesn't respond. So we're like, what's going on? So we're feverishly texting him and calling him and trying to figure out, Chris, what's going on? And we don't know. And so a couple of weeks pass, and there was even one day, one of our small group members and we went to his apartment, and we literally just knocked on the door for 3 hours because we were like, we literally hear someone inside, right? But no answer. A couple weeks pass after that, and Chris shows up to small group again. And this time he's carrying a 1-gallon jug of water, and he looks completely out of it. And we're like, what's going on? And so we're like, Chris, are you okay? And we find out he got caught up in crystal meth. And so fell into drugs, and life was not good. And for whatever reason, he felt still comfortable enough to come to small group. And so we would try to navigate, hey, how do we help you get clean? And at that point, he didn't really want to. And so we're trying to just figure out how do we best love Chris? Several weeks pass after that, and Chris comes to small group again, and he goes, guys, actually my apartment has become a drug den where the local, crystal meth community just comes. And he's like, things are getting really out of hand in my apartment. And so as a small group, we're like, oh, can we do we call the police? And he's like, no, I can't call the police because if the police come, that would violate my parole and I'd have to go back to jail. And so we're like, that's hard. And so we're like, Chris, what do you wish happens? And Chris was like, I really just want my space back. I wish these people would just leave, and I want to start over. So I'm like, okay. So me and one other guy in our small group named Ryan, after small group, we're just talking about the situation with Chris, and he and I kind of look at each other, and we're like, should we go kick him out? Now, mind you, Ryan looks kind of similar to Lewis in terms of build. Okay. So between the two of us, we're not the most intimidating, right, people, right? We could but not right. And so we're like, we don't know what's going to happen, but we can try. So it's like, hey, let's schedule a time after work. Let's make sure Chris is at home, and we're going to go and kick these people out. Yeah. Okay. Again, not smart. Ill-advised. Do not find a drug den and kick out drug users and drug dealers, okay? And so Ryan and I show up at the time. I will never forget this. We park in the alley, and before we go, we're like, we should definitely pray. and I look at Ryan, and I'm like, I can only see 3 outcomes from tonight. Outcome 1, we both die. Okay? We have to just accept that is a possible outcome. Outcome 2, both of us are going to experience what it's like to do crystal meth. Right? Because we're going to show up and they're just be like, give it to us, and we're going to be like, oh, yeah, okay, sure, whatever, right? Or option 3, God's going to do something. I don't know what, but something's going to happen outside of our imagination, and something's going to happen. And so Ryan and I pray. We kind of look at each other and give that silent, like, okay, we got this-ish, right? And we walk up towards the apartment. And as we're walking to the apartment, all we see are these people with moving boxes moving out of Chris's apartment. And we're like, what's going on? And so we find Chris, and we're like, Chris, what's happening? And Chris is like, dude, I don't know what's going on, but suddenly everyone doesn't want to be here. They just want to leave. So everyone's like packing up and just leaving. So my friend Ryan and I were like, oh, do you need help moving? Like, we can do that, right? So we're like helping people pack. We're like, what is this? And they're like, oh, that's what I use to like inject. And we're like, ooh, okay. Do I wrap it in paper or like what do I? And we helped them move out. And it was incredibly cool. Again, not smart, but I believe wise. Now, I guarantee that not all of you in this room are going to be asked to make a decision of wisdom that looks like that. Some of you might. But that may not be what wisdom looks like for you. What wisdom might look like for you is perhaps there's a career path that you've been told this is what you must pursue. But perhaps God is calling you to something else. What wisdom might look like is rather than reacting the way that you normally do when your parents trigger you, that you take that extra moment of pause and you do the radical thing of listening to them. What wisdom might look like for you is instead of falling into the traps of school politics, of gossip, to say, I'm going to be different. What wisdom might look like for you is you see someone being bullied, you see someone being outcasted, you see someone being hurt, and you say, it may not be smart for my reputation, it may not be smart for my finances, it may not be smart for my time, but God, is it wise for me to engage? And when you engage, perhaps, maybe, God will show up. Now, again, some of us, I think, we long for this thriving, vibrant relationship with God that's dynamic and exciting, and I want that for you, but a lot of us, I feel like, get really just distracted by things that don't necessarily matter. So I just want to end by sharing this picture. So this is me and my sister. And this was kind of in the middle of her cancer treatments. And so what would happen as she was doing chemo is we would have these kind of breaks in her treatment. And during those breaks, the hospital would give her permission to leave the hospital. And so our family would normally take like mini trips. Since we grew up in Southern California, a very common trip we would take was to the beach. And so here is Redondo Beach, I believe. And so this one particular day, we went to Redondo Beach. And our rhythm as a family when we would go to the beach is my dad and I would pair up, and my sister and mom would pair up. And we would walk down the pier, and my sister and mom would do shopping because my sister liked to buy like seashells and those kinds of things. And my dad and I would go to what I affectionately call the kids' casino, the arcade, right? And so my dad and I would go and we'd do the ticket stuff and all that. This particular day, however, my sister asked my parents, hey, actually, can I go to the arcade with David and Dad? Now, this was kind of strange because on one hand, my sister wasn't really into arcades, but on the other hand, the arcade was kind of a hard space for my sister because loud noises, not very good air quality. It was just like a difficult space for her. And so my parents were a little bit like caught off guard, like, huh. But she said she wanted to do it, so we decided to go to the arcade together. And so we do, all the arcade things, the tokens, the tickets. You're like trying to get the big prize on the wall, but you end up with like the sticky hand thing or like the finger traps or like a random eraser, like in the shape of a race car, right? All of us have been there, right? And as we were going home, before we get in the car and go home, my parents took this picture of us. So we get in the car, and I would normally sit in the front with my dad, and my mom and sister would sit in the back because my sister liked laying down and resting as we drove home. And so before my sister fell asleep, my mom was just very curious, like, why did Angelica want to go to the arcade today? And so my mom turns to Angelica and goes, hey, I'm just curious. Why did you decide you wanted to go to the arcade today? And my sister turns to my mom and says, I just really hope David doesn't forget today. Now, I wish I could tell you that I remember this story. But I don't. The only thing I have is this picture and the stories that my mom tells me. The question becomes, well, how come I don't remember that day? I don't remember that day because I was distracted. I thought that the more important thing was the tickets, the points that I was scoring. And I missed out on something extremely precious. I truly believe this, that much of our life, God is living alongside you and saying, I hope you never forget today. That I want to take you on this adventure, and I hope you won't forget it. But we get distracted. We get more stressed out about who's following us on Instagram or who's reacting to what or how many points you missed on this midterm. And somehow we think that those things are the things that are going to change our lives. I'm sorry to say, whether you get a 98 or an 89 on your chemistry midterm will honestly have no change to the outcome of your life. Even though it feels intensely different. So how do we live a life in which we are engaged with God and remembering those moments? We do that by making wise decisions. To be in tune with what do you want from me in this moment? And I just want to follow you. And I want to go on those adventures. And I want a life that maybe wasn't very intelligent, maybe wasn't very smart, but if at the end of the day, people can see my life as wise, and because of the wise decisions that I've made, they are able to come out of their desperate, hopeless situations of hiding and join me in the pursuit of you, that would be a life well worth it. And that is the hope and the prayer that I have for all of us here. That we would truly awaken to a life of meaning. To not just wake up to have like some little motivation to just get through the day, but to really live. To really be excited about life. To really be able to look at your life as a deeply precious gift, because it is. And to be able to get to heaven one day and look at God and say, I remember those moments. I remember those days. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, as we just come before you, we thank you for allowing us to have come to this retreat. But Lord, we know that the work that you are doing doesn't start and end here. That you are consistently, constantly at work in our lives, that you have sent your own Spirit to work in our lives. And so, Lord, I pray for everyone here that if you are calling them to a decision of wisdom, that they would boldly take those steps, and that their friends here would be good armor bearers and willing to stand alongside them and say, do it, for I am with you, heart and soul. And Lord, I pray that this would be a community that is able to gather together and to share the stories of wisdom and to celebrate the ways in which you just show up in unexpected circumstances, in ways in which we can say, I remember those moments. Rather than pursuing the little meaningless trinkets of life, we have memories with God that matter. I know, Lord, that as we return from retreat, oftentimes life has a way of just returning back to normal. And some of that's good. But Lord, I do pray that there is some form of sticking power from the decisions that have been made these last couple of hours. That you would really strengthen everyone here and encourage everyone here as they live out their lives and really awaken to your calling to them. So we again just thank you for the opportunity to be here, to even have the time to think of these things. And we pray these things in your precious Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen.